Trauma has become a pretty popular word these days, and everyone from psychologists to podcasters, the self improvement bros, everyone has their thoughts on it. And I'd like to give my thoughts on it. This is not from the perspective of a physician, it's not a replacement for therapy by any means or medical advice by any means. This is me now in my 30s, essentially talking into a mic and writing down here what I wish I could tell my younger self. You're welcome to listen in on our conversation, and I hope it helps you too. First things first, we all have a version of trauma. One person's definition doesn't need to be compared to somebody else's. What we find challenging in our lives, what happened that defined our lives, what we found difficult, these are all personal things that we all decide on. But needless to say, that every life is difficult in some form or another. That doesn't necessarily mean that every life is traumatic, but that experience of trauma is something that's unique and subjective to each individual. And I could give you many examples of what I felt like I went through as a kid that I would define as my own trauma. But I think what's more important than the example is a framework to not only deal with it, but finding a way to take power over it. And that's the first important thing to understand, is that you don't owe anybody an explanation for the trauma that you feel like you went through. It doesn't require anyone else's validation. If it affected you, it affected you, and that's the bottom line. And trauma as a whole, it's not just some event or some occurrence, it's the neurological adaptation that's included in that package as well. When you have an experience that overwhelms your ability to cope at that time, that's when trauma essentially occurs. So it's not just the event that happens, it's what your mind and nervous system learn from it. It might have learned that I'm not safe, I'm only valuable if I perform. People always leave. I have to stay in control. I can't trust anyone. And over time, these beliefs that started off as adaptations become your reality. They shape how you live your adult life, all the way back from what might have happened as a kid or many years ago, because your nervous system formed these beliefs as a protective mechanism against whatever happened. And that would be the first action step, is to analyze not only what happened, but what did you take from it? How is it affecting you now? I'd recommend putting aside time, grabbing a journal, a blank sheet of paper, a pen, a quiet environment, no headphones, no screens, no bullshit, and just sitting there and asking yourself, again, what happened, but also the version of yourself that you are today, what adaptations, quote unquote, whether good or bad, what are you still carrying with you because of that experience? And what you might realize is that many of your worst habits that you now have were formed from a foundation of survival strategies. The perfectionism that you have now, back in the day, might have been because of your need for approval. People pleasing is what kept the peace in your chaotic household. So now you're basically a doormat. Your hyper independence might have prevented disappointment as a child. Your anxiety helped you anticipate danger or how your alcoholic father would show up that night back at home. You being emotionally numb to everything might have made unbearable experiences survivable back when you were a kid. None of these patterns just developed out of nowhere. They developed because your brain was optimizing for survival, certainly not happiness. And the tragedy is that these strategies that your brain felt helped you survive in your childhood prevent you from living a full life in your adulthood. And healing isn't about blaming yourself for having these seemingly negative habits. It's about recognizing that they had a certain purpose, they're there for a certain reason, but now they've outlived that purpose. So understanding that your bad habits and personality traits that you might judge as bad in some way serve as an adaptive mechanism, or at least they did in the past. Now, after you do that and you recognize what happened, why are you the way that you are because of it, How was it adaptive? How is it counterproductive now? The next thing that's really helped me is to stop asking why. It's easy to get caught up in these why questions. Why did I have to go through that? Why did it have to happen to me? Why my family? Why my relationship? Why this or that? And truly, there's no satisfying answer. You can't go back and ask whoever else was involved or whatever the situation was, the behind the scenes of why it's happening. Sometimes people are selfish. It's a fallen world. People are imperfect. The classic saying that hurt people hurt people. And sometimes the answer is that life might just be unfair. And so waiting for this perfect explanation of why something happened, it just keeps you trapped in the past. And there is no satisfying answer that's coming. Often there's no apology or explanation that's coming, and it just is what it is. And a better question to replace this question with is, this happened, period, end of story. Can't be changed. I don't expect an explanation for it. Okay, fine. What do I do now? Who do I become now? And that is the question that returns agency and power back to yourself. So again, switching from why to now what. Now, there is this idea in psychology of post-traumatic growth. There have been several research studies where psychologists found that after profound adversity, some people would note positive changes in their lives, but the key thing to understand, it's not because of the adversity itself, the bad thing happening or the trauma or whatever you want to call it. That happening itself wasn't beneficial, but it was because of the work they did afterwards. They found that they had deeper relationships, clearer priorities, greater appreciation for life, among other things, but it came from the work that they did after the fact, not just going through that experience. And the key thing to understand here is that just because you're hoping to grow from the experience you went through, it doesn't mean it replaces suffering. Both can exist at the same time. You can still have anxiety or grieve whatever happened. You can still get blindsided by memories years later. It doesn't mean that you failed to grow from it. It just means that growth and pain, they can happen side by side. So it's not just about being motivational and just saying, oh, everything happens for a reason. That reframe can be important and beneficial, but it's okay to face your feelings and feel them fully as you grow. It's not one or the other. And that's where this idea of illusory growth versus real growth comes in. Real growth is going to come slowly by confronting what happened, questioning the beliefs that it left behind, and rebuilding your understanding of yourself. Whereas illusory growth, it's just a polished story. It's just saying, everything happens for a reason. I'm grateful it happened. I wouldn't change anything. Some of these things can be true after a while, but if you're just saying them without actually analyzing and going through this process, it's just on the surface. It's fake. And an important question you can ask yourself to elucidate which kind of growth you're actually doing is you can ask yourself, does the story I'm telling myself help me face my feelings or avoid them? Because real growth is only going to come from being honest with yourself and facing it head on. And time by itself isn't going to heal anything. People love to say time heals all wounds, and that's not exactly true. If you just repeat the same patterns, the same behaviors, get stuck in the same identity, nothing is ever going to change. What time does is it gives you opportunities to reflect, to analyze from a distance, to learn, and the potential for healing lies in what you do with those things. And this is what deliberate rumination is. It's not endlessly replaying what happened or not spiraling, but it's about returning to that experience with curiosity instead of fear, talking about it, writing about it, looking at it from different angles, asking those difficult questions we talked about. How did this affect me? How do I carry those things forward now? What did this teach me about people, about myself? Where did these beliefs come from that I have? Which ones are still productive and protecting me? Which ones are counterproductive or getting in the way of my life? And this process of deliberate rumination, asking yourself these questions, reflecting, taking time with it, that is what actually heals with time. It's not just time alone. And once you've ruminated on those things, the next thing would be to keep the strength but leave the pain behind. You can acknowledge and feel what trauma might have taken away from you. However, also analyzing and accepting the fact that it's given you some other things. If you were heavily criticized, your parents were very nitpicky and judgmental, it might have made you very disciplined in your life. You can keep that discipline. Discipline is a good thing, it's a positive thing, but you can lose the shame, you can lose the insecurity. Going through hardship as a kid of any kind, it might have made you resilient today. Resilience is a good thing, you can keep that. However, you can choose to lose the hypervigilance and being on your toes all the time and anxious all the time. Being lonely or bullied might have made you very empathetic now. You can keep the empathy. You can treat other people right, but you can lose the belief that you always have to carry everything alone and that you're on your own. And this is the key thing. This is the part where you take the power and the agency. Instead of giving control to the experiences that you went through, now is your time to shine. You've faced it head on, you've ruminated on it, and now you get to decide moving forward from this day forward, what am I going to choose to do because I went through that experience, rather than submitting to it and just being what you always have been because you feel like that's your lot in life and that's what you're always going to do. And to each their own, but like I said, this is simply a conversation between me and my younger self. And I have to say that God plays a huge part in my life and in the way that I do this process. I truly believe that everything happens for a reason, not just from a motivational perspective, but rather every single experience I have, especially the bad ones. I choose to believe and I truly believe that God is putting me through that for a reason. I don't know what the reason is. I've gotten better about not needing to know what the reason is right away, but just trusting that fact. And like I said, to each their own. It could be the universe for you, fate, whatever you believe in. But for me, it's God. I know for a fact that when I look back at my childhood, any challenge, any difficulty that I had, any trauma, to put it into a word, every single one of those things has contributed to where I am now. The career I decided to pursue, the discipline that I have, the ambition that I have, it all stemmed from these traumatic events as a child. Being poor, being bullied, being lonely, very low self-image, feeling weak, all of those things, and how I decided to remedy them made me who I am today. And now, through this, through my career, through the way I interact with people, I get to pass it forward. So my running belief is that everything that I go through, good or bad, God is teaching me what I need to know to then move forward and serve others. And adopting that belief and using it in this process, it is what gives me the power over the experiences that I didn't have control over before. Now, when you do this and you choose what it is that you want to carry forward and extract from that experience, choose goodness moving forward. Whether it's in how you treat people, the career you decide to pursue, the lessons that you can pass forward to others. And there is no correct answer for how you do this. It doesn't mean that just because you went through something, you have to now write a book about it, or give a TED talk, or build an entire career around what happened. It can be quieter than that. It can just be being the friend who knows what to say when someone else is grieving because you've been in that situation. It's about standing up for others when they're too weak or insecure to stand up for themselves because you've been weak and insecure. It's about making sure that, hey, when I'm a parent, I'm going to make sure that these generational issues stop with me, and I'm going to do everything in my power to make sure that I don't pass this garbage forward. And those are things that no one's going to applaud for you, and you might not necessarily be popular for them, but you know within your soul that I took what I went through, I took what could have broken me, and I decided to face it, to take control over it, and to use it for good. And if I could just simplify this whole process in a few words, it would be to hold the pen to your own story. You didn't get to control how the story started or what happened in the earlier parts, but now you can. And the story you tell yourself is going to decide how you show up in this world. And that story might start early on as I have to prove myself, or I'm not enough, or I'll always be abandoned. I can't trust anyone. But remember, these stories often begin as adaptations. They don't have to become your identity. You don't have to pretend that the past was different than it was just to heal. It's about refusing to let yesterday write every chapter of tomorrow. Remember that you're in charge. You get to choose whether outer events and circumstances have power over you or if you're going to take power over them. So choose to write your own story, to write a better one, to push forward, and to serve others because you were strong enough to carry the burden of whatever you went through. That's it for this one. If you're interested in free resources, the newsletter, the community, all that stuff, it'll be in the description. I'd like to put out ebooks and free resources designed based on how I've worked through this stuff. And I hope all those things help you guys out too. All right, we'll talk soon.